Okay, happy Friday, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining today. I'm the executive director here at SB at Home, and my name is Regina Celestin Williams. And we're excited to host you for a thoughtful conversation about the upcoming election on November 5th. Um, and we hope to focus on what it means for housing in Silicon Valley. So, this event, Policy in Action at Home, is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on hot housing topics. Every month, we select a topic or current event, bring in an expert to give a brief presentation, and then we open up the discussion to ask questions, float new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamian Nation, and Amamutsin tribal band, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. So I'm so very excited about today's discussion. We know this is such an important election, as all elections are. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to today's moderator, SB at Home's Deputy Director, Josh Ishimatsu.
Hi, everybody. So what the slide that you see before you right now is our shared code of conduct for these events. And we very much want to ensure that the conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind and courteous to each other. No rude comments or personal attacks. We encourage asking questions and listening as we learn and engage with each other. And please remember that while today's event is focused on the upcoming election, we are a nonpartisan organization, and today's event is about sharing information about the election as it relates to housing issues, and it's not about supporting any particular candidate. So we ask that people respect the spirit of this event. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat and ask that you please keep the questions and chat on topic and within the spirit of information, of sharing information, of knowing more about housing issues and the election. Sometimes the chat can get lively. If you find that is distracting you from the content of the discussion, we encourage that you consider closing the chat temporarily. And finally, if a person is disruptive or otherwise violates this code of conduct, they may be removed with or without warning. So without further ado, let's move on to our main event. And I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Kathy Tran. She serves on the board of the Silicon Valley at Home Action Fund, which is SV at Home's affiliated 501c4 organization. Kathy is from San Jose, and she's the eldest daughter of Vietnamese refugees, and she is a graduate of San Jose State University. She is an experienced political organizer and currently works for, as you can see in her background, IFPTE. So that's the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, Local 21. So it's a public sector union that represents about 11,000 workers throughout the Bay Area. And previously, Kathy has worked for State Assembly as a field representative, and she's worked in DC as a congressional fellow. She serves as a delegate to the South Bay Labor Council and as a board member of the New Leaders of Silicon Valley chapter. She has been recognized by former State Senator Jim Bell as a Rising Star, Women of the Year honoree in 2020. And so we're thrilled to have her experience and perspective today. So Kathy, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Am I screen sharing the presentation? Okay,
Mhm. And
awesome.
I'm supposed to be taken out of the spotlight too.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I actually made this joke earlier to Regina, but as somebody that graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science, it's always really great to be able to work in the field that I studied and, get to participate civically every day. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I can't wait to talk to you all about this upcoming November. Some of the things that I'll be talking about in this agenda is kind of taking a big picture look at the federal politics, and then we'll get into more of the nitty gritty on the housing measures in the state and the local level. As shared earlier, we won't get into specific candidates and talk about like who we're supporting or endorsing, but we'll talk a little bit about some of these races to pay attention to where housing matters, and then share what we're doing at the SV at Home Action Fund and voting resources. So next slide. So at the federal level, I think this is the piece that everybody is really attuned to with the presidential race. It's a presidential year. Most people are really focused on the US Senate and House races and, getting majority to some of those seats. And I think what's at the top of the ticket, it really captures the most attention, but and it's really hard not to pay attention when people in these roles at the federal level get to make so many important decisions in our lives. And the contrast between different candidates and their platforms can be very vast in their differences. But I'm not going to be spending too much time here. I'll be spending the majority focusing on the measures and the local races to pay attention to. I think I can really leave like the political pundits like on the news and on podcasts to really delve in deeper what's going on federally and like what are the hot policy issues there. But I will say that, when it comes to it being a presidential election year, we really have to make sure that we're talking to the people in our lives to make sure that, if they're really excited about what's happening at that level, make sure that we are talking about what's also happening down ticket and the state and the local things that really matter to us. Next slide. So at the state level, I think granularly, we're going to be discussing like the measures, and then we can talk a little bit about like one of the candidates, but that's kind of what the meat and potatoes that we're going to get into. I think to start off with, for RM4, I need to talk a little bit about that. So SV at Home and many of you were really excited about the possibility of a major regional housing bond, which we really expected to be on the ballot throughout the Bay Area this November. Unfortunately, that measure was pulled off the ballot at the last minute after facing a number of challenges from anti-tax and anti-housing extremists. It was always we always knew that passing a housing bond at that scale was always going to require passing Prop 5. And so just keeping in mind and knowing that with stronger opposition, trying to do both at the same time, like the campaign leads at the state and regional level decided it was better to do Prop 5 first. And if we pass Prop 5, that will really open the door for Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, and communities across California in the future. Next slide. So, I talked a little bit about Prop 5, but you're like, what is Prop 5? I think for most people here in the audience, I think we're familiar with it. It would allow for the approval of local voters to approve bonds for affordable housing and critical infrastructure with a 55% vote. This is very important because this would remove a systematic barrier that blocks our ability to create more housing. And with Prop 5, communities will have more power to build new housing renovate existing housing, and provide more affordable housing options. As you know, our state is facing increasingly serious challenges, and without the funds we need to address them, it's going to be very difficult to do so. In Santa Clara County, 71% of renters with extremely low incomes pay more than half of their income each month for housing. From 2015 to 2022, Santa Clara County's jurisdictions permitted just 36% of the homes that we needed for low income houses, only 12% annually statewide. You know, it's something that critical infrastructure like roads, bridges, water systems, and aging, like those things are unsafe, and we need to be better prepared and equipped with emergency and fire responses to protect our families and our communities. So California voters strongly supporting building affordable housing for low and middle income families, and related public infrastructure like roads and transit, water and fire stations. Like these are the things that really matter to our communities. But as it stands right now, the state's current 2/3 requirement, it doesn't really let us from approving these bonds for our communities. I'll give one example. So in 2018, San Jose's housing bond failed with 64% of the vote. And so this is why, like, when we're talking about like how do these state measures, like how do they matter? Why do we talk about it? How come we are paying so much attention to this 55% or like 2/3%? Like we're always talking about like the metrics of what gets passed. This is why it matters, because you know, everybody when they're either driving their car or biking, like they care about, you know, having good roads. They care about, you know, being able to afford a place to live. About like that's how you're able to start families. That's how you're able to build community. And so we always try to bring it back to why this matters. Next slide. Another proposition that is on the state ballot is Proposition 33. So this would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, which currently prohibits local ordinances in limiting initial residential rental rates for new tenants or rent increases for existing tenants in certain residential properties. So if that sounds really complicated, this issue is a little complicated, so I'm not going to dwell too much into it. I would say that what we're focusing the most in Silicon Valley at home and here regionally is going to be Prop 5, but I would be remiss if I did not mention Prop 33. Next slide. Here's the part where I think I am most passionate about, and I really want to make sure that we're really engaging as many people as possible to get involved at this level, just because it's so close to what we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So first, I'll talk about Mountain View Measure G in the next slide. So in Mountain View, the city council put a revenue measure called Measure G on the November ballot. And revenue measures, like the way that they work, sometimes you'll get your ballot, like depending on where you're at, and you get to see like, you know, top of the ticket stuff, and then it comes to the California state stuff, and then it comes to your measures and then your local candidates. So one reason why I'm specifically highlighting Measure G is because the funds that they want to raise with this measure is specifically, there's a section that focuses on developing and preserving affordable housing. Most of the time when there are revenue measures, it's really to expand and focus on public services, right? Like, so, you know, some of the things listed here, like public safety, parks, infrastructure, sustainability, like those are all really important things to focus on. But I think what's really unique about Measure G for folks who live in Mountain View is the specific focus on developing and preserving affordable housing goals. And so if that's something that you're like really interested in and want to pay more attention to, a lot of the cities, they have like fact sheets, they have a city clerk, like that's something. They also have campaigns set up that you can contact and call more information if this is something you're really interested in, like digging deeper. But I wanted to specifically highlight this local ballot measure that has this provision. Next slide. Another measure happening locally that the San Jose Unified School District has put on the ballot is Measure R. This is a little different than what's happening in Mountain View. So Measure R is a bond measure that would authorize the issuance of $1.15 billion in bond for faculty improvements. And you know, the interesting thing about this Measure R, because a lot of bond measures specifically focus on infrastructure and repairs for schools. And why we're highlighting it here is that there's a discussion about pursuing affordable housing through this bond measure to attract and retain teachers and staff members. And so we're kind of highlighting and focusing on Measure R because that's something that the community has discussed before, and pursuing it here in this ballot measure is a way to try to attain it. And similarly to Measure G, where you can look for more information on the specifics on those things and kind of have the opportunity to talk to these board of trustees to have a robust conversation. I think that it's really interesting. In terms of like ballot measures, there's all sorts of different types of measures that can be put on the ballot. Some things are like charter amendments, some things are parcel taxes, some things are bond measures, but it is important to know that when it comes to the topic of housing, these are an avenue for us to be able to try to have a conversation and try to make it a possibility to build more affordable housing. And so Measure R is something that I wanted to highlight and spotlight as a housing thing to pay attention to. Next slide. Local candidates. So something like, again, we can't talk about really specific people. There are so many people that are running for local office, but making an informed decision about learning who is running and their positions is going to be really critical and key for your civic participation this November. Again, I kind of talked about this earlier about just like the day-to-day impact, right? So like, for example, I work for a labor union that represents public sector workers. My membership has a really unique ability to be able to elect the bosses that that govern their city. That's a really cool and unique thing that public sector workers get to have. And so whenever I talk to our membership, I'm always highlighting how important it is that they're supporting people that are going to be supporting working families, for example. Similarly, like we want to be supporting local candidates that are interested and care about building affordable housing. And when it comes to making those decisions, there are a lot of different ways for you to get the information you need in order to make it. But just know that every little thing counts. Every little thing makes a really huge impact. I think some of folks here might be housing experts. If you're not a housing expert, that's okay too. Like the fact that anything that you know and what you can share with your community, it really goes a long way. Next slide. But I do think that there are a few local races in particular to highlight. So I put it from the most local to like the federal level, but for Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, District 2 and District 5, at the BOS level, they're able to make really high level decisions that impact like, again, like some of these ballot measures that can build affordable housing. For District 2 in particular, this is an open seat to replace the outgoing supervisor, Cindy Chavez, after her term. And in District 5, this would be an open seat in replacing Supervisor Joe Simidian. For the California State Assembly District 26, this is one of the most competitive races here locally that's going on. So we have two Democrats, Patrick Ahrens and Tara Srikrishnan, who are running for representing that. And this is a really exciting seat because at first we didn't have that, since the elected official that was there is running for the California House of Representatives, District 16. And this is a really interesting and exciting competitive U.S. House race in Santa Clara County. So we have Sam Liccardo and Evan Lowe running against each other. And I always like to share like how your vote is like your voice. And in this case, they had a tie in the primary, which is really something that you're like, how does that happen? But it happens more often than you would think. Locally in Sunnyvale, there was a tie for a local district race. And then in Richmond too, there was also a tie. So they had to determine those through, one was like a bag where they shook a piece of paper, and another one was like a coin flip, I believe. So, trying to talk to your friends and family as much as possible about participating and paying attention to these are really, really going to be key. And, you can get a lot of resources. I can talk more about that like near the end, but I just feel sometimes, we talk about the presidency, talk about like city council, but some of these ones, it's also important to make sure we know who we're supporting. Next slide. I get to put on I guess I am wearing my Silicon Valley at Home Action Fund hat since I get to serve on this really awesome board. But because Silicon Valley at Home is a 501c3, what the Action Fund is actually the affiliated 501c4. If you're like, okay, what's the difference between 3 and 4? Well, the 4 part allows for us to be able to participate and activate more in lobbying and political activity. And so some of the big things that we're doing at the Action Fund is working on ballot measures and leadership development specifically. So this picture here is a picture of our cohort that we recently had. So I can talk a little bit more about that. But on the ballot measure side, in 2020, the Action Fund was able to play a really central role on the Measure E campaign, which was able to raise millions of dollars for affordable housing in San Jose. Like I shared earlier, in terms of one of the key things to focus on, the Action Fund is similarly going to be supporting the campaign in Silicon Valley to get the word out about Prop 5. And then back to the leadership part, we were able to launch our civic leadership program, which goes ahead and trains the emerging political leaders who are committed to housing justice, equity, and community. It's something that I'm really passionate about and really excited about, because the more people that we can really get excited and engage in participating, on local boards, on planning commissions, on local campaigns, like this really sets us up for better candidates, better engagement, better people who are more familiar with the policies that matter to us as housing advocates. So specifically for the Civic Leadership Program, participants get to meet for multiple days as a cohort, and they get to learn from the SV at Home staff and each other. Some of the things that they talk about for this program is how to run for local office, how to run a campaign, how to serve on some of these boards and commissions. They learn about housing policy, storytelling, communications. Like this is something that, if you know a person that is really dynamic, who is motivated, who really cares about housing justice, like make sure to reach out to one of our SV at Home folks to talk more about the civic leadership program and our work that we're doing at the Action Fund. Next slide. So back to voting resources and getting the vote out and being engaged for this November. So for me, I think that there are a variety and lots of different ways for you to get information. I do a mix of both. So the local newspapers and medias will have a lot of condensed guides that will tell you like, hey, this is going to be what's on the California ballot. We have resources like Vote 411 or the Register of Voters that really like spell out all the different days, like, hey, early October is when you're going to be expecting to receive your ballot in the mail. You're also, if you change resident addresses or whatnot, they make it a really easy job for you to be able to log on, change your registration. It's really simple. I really like to go on the Secretary of State or the Register of Voters specifically to like look at the different measures that are there, and then our candidates. You can also get like a sample ballot if you wanted to, if you're like curious, like maybe that's just me being a little extra, but if I live in San Jose in a certain district, but I am curious what's going on in Campbell, like I can go and look it up at one of these resources here. And of course, there are also voter guides that exist, endorsement lists. Again, like my union, for example, we put together endorsements and we have a list that people can take to the ballot box or download just to see who they're voting as they're filling out their ballot. But there are other voting resources that I actually didn't list but are available too. So, if you're interested in your local, you're a parent and you are interested in who's running for a school board, look up their websites, watch candidate forums. These are a lot of different ways we can engage and really make sure we're asking and talking to them. Hey, what's your stance on housing? Hey, have you thought about this in terms of affordable housing? There are lots of ways for us to make sure that we can engage on things like that. Like if you are attending a candidate forum, right, and you have an opportunity to raise your hand and ask the question, like you can ask these candidates about where they stand on housing. And that's just some of the few ways, that we can make an informed decision and also advocate and push for the things that matter. Because whenever candidates, they run for office, they have a platform, but they also have to answer to constituents. And so when you and your friends, your neighbors, and your community make housing a priority and always push it as a really important issue, people have to address and make sure that that's something that is considered. And so I highly recommend checking out some of these resources and tapping some of your friends, or like if you get to be in a special privileged position to be the one that knows stuff about elections to really help out people in voting. And I think that is it. Next slide. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these things. I'm so excited to be able to get to do this work, not just as a SB at Home Action Board member, but just like in my day-to-day, like being able to empower people to take their role in voting is really important. Like voting is a hard fought right, and so we have to make sure that we're exercising it and making sure that we live in a community that really values it. So thanks so much for having me as your speaker.
I was on mute. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much. That was a great overview. And I don't think we've had very many questions. So people, please post your questions if you have any. But I do have a couple questions for you, Kathy. So first is, you talked about how important it is that we talk to everybody in our lives. So how do you personally get your friends and family, how do you get people around you excited about elections? How you plan on getting them excited about the coming election? And what tips do you have for those of us who might want to talk to our folks too?
Thanks, Josh. I love that question. I think specifically because I'm an organizer, I really view every conversation as like an organizing conversation. So I typically like to just ask like, what issues do you care about? Or I ask, hey, do you know who your local elected council member is? Do you know who your elected school board member is? And I gauge it from there and kind of build and make sure that I'm able to educate what these roles even do, and also share their specific policy positions where I can. The best example I can give is like, if somebody's like, oh my gosh, there are so many potholes on my street, like, who do I talk to about that? Or like, my garbage can is like the lid keeps blowing away or something, like what's going on there? And so when I get to have the opportunity to talk to people about that, I'm like, oh, that's actually something that your city council person focuses on. Like, it's actually very easy to get a hold of them. You can just go on their website and call them and somebody will get back to you on that issue. And so really being an active listener and checking in with the person first on what they care about and their needs, like that's how I start the conversation. But of course, because I'm also an organizer, I also care a lot about things like housing justice, and about like clean parks and stuff. So I'll be like, hey, this person's specific platform has XYZ things, like you should check out this person. But it's really asking what they care about, driving them to be able to be like, you can do something about it, that like you can engage with this person, and then following up with them, like being like, hey, have you actually talked to them about this concern you have? Like, oh, did you go to their website? Or how do you feel about that? Or even just like, hey, have you voted yet? Like, did you get your ballot? Like, I got mine, like having conversations, like it doesn't always have to be hard. It can really be simple and easy. It's just a matter of really making sure you're being a good listener, and also like making sure it's about them and the things that matter in building community. So I hope I answered the question. I might have rambled a little bit. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. No, I think that was a great answer. And I really appreciate that. And also, I'm wondering, you're talking about like how tying things to people's own lives. How about like housing and high cost of housing? I imagine that makes it easy to bring in housing.
Absolutely. I mean, living in Silicon Valley, it's so expensive to live here. It's like you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know, like going to the grocery store and like buying eggs, you're like, what? So talking about it is actually, I think, very easy. Like, hey, you can just say something as simple as like, rent is really expensive here. Like, like where's a place to live? And, talking about like being able to afford having a family, being able to afford daycare, being able to live in the community that you want to work and play in. Like sometimes that is out of the picture. And luckily there's stuff that we can do about it, such as getting involved in Prop 5, right? So I really think that when it comes to I guess like civic engagement or like dealing with things on a real issue, we have to remember like there are people's lives at stake, right? Like people's livelihoods really depend on being able to have affordable rent, being able to stay in this area. And so we need to make sure that where we can in having those conversations and really talking about housing policies, bringing it back to making sure like they know what's going on, what's happening, why they should participate, and why it matters.
Yeah,
It's always
awesome.
centering.
That is so important. So what do you think about like polling? And this is top of my mind because, earlier this week, PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, came out with some statewide polling about what the Proposition 5, which you're talking about before. And that's like, it's like very, very tight right now. So 49% support, 50% against, with 1% undecided, with a 3% margin of error. So, I mean, maybe just, talk about how you think about polling, how you talk about polling, because, I mean, I know that you have a lot to say about this.
Sure. Regarding polling, in a big picture way, polling is really important to the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. Polling helps us decide where to prioritize our efforts politically. So, for example, in my union, I work on specific campaigns, and we really utilize polling in order to figure out, like, hey, when it's something that's like the margins razor thin, I'm like, that's something that we really need to be energizing and focusing on, because that means we have a chance to win, right? If, I get back polling and it says, oh, say the candidate I care about, they are doing really poorly. I'm like, oh, does this mean this person even has a fighting shot? And then also conversely, if this person is doing super well, I'm like, well, how much attention am I going to be putting into this, right? So when it comes, so specifically to the Prop 5 polling being that close, that really means that there's opportunity to be able to work really hard and make sure that it doesn't stay like that, but we actually are able to have a fighting chance. So that's how I would answer that question.
I think that's a great answer. And, one of the ways that I've heard about it talked about before is that, like, when it's within the margin of error, like for the poll, that's actually within the margin of effort. So that means that this is something, it means that it being so close means that our efforts really matter, and our ability to change the outcome, or make a positive outcome, is really highlighted. So I saw, I'm not really able to see, because, see everybody's hands raised. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat, because we're not able to, I'm not, when I have the screens up like this, I'm not able to see everybody's hands raised. So I think the fairest way to sort of like adjudicate questions is to put them in the chat, please. I mean, you talked a little bit about, like, where you get your political information. I mean, you're somebody who does this for a living, so you're super informed. Do you have any more thoughts about, like, how the rest of us can keep up with politics and keep up with some of this political information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say some of the most accessible ways that most people get their information is through social media and through their local newspaper. So here in Santa Clara County, for example, you have the Mercury News, you have San Jose Spotlight, you have the Metro. I mean, those are some of the newspapers that are around, and they post on X or Instagram or whatnot. It's just where people naturally are going to be at, and they kind of see it. In other jurisdictions where I work in, sometimes people have Substacks. Sometimes people like follow the like things going on at the San Francisco Chronicle, for example. But that is like one of the easier ways most people are able to access information. Sometimes if you really want to do a deep dive into finding information, like for myself, I really like to follow the money when it comes to certain candidates. And so Spotlight actually think does a pretty good job of that. But if you yourself were interested in pursuing that, a lot of our city websites or municipalities, they either have like a city clerk or a public commission or public ethics commission, and there's like a public filing portal, and you can click on their form 460s to actually see who donates to their campaigns and whatnot. And that's like a really cool way for you to kind of see like, oh, who, because whenever you donate something, that is a cost. That is something that's not just like, hey, I'm gonna put you up on my social media. This is like somebody that's like, I'm vouching for you. And so for me, like following the money and like checking some of these forms and seeing who's participating is a really cool way for me to see like who's standing behind them outside of just like endorsement lists and voter guides. So that's one way I get to get my information. Another thing that I do, I don't know if other people do this or how popular it is, but I also use Google Alerts. I set up certain Google Alerts for issues that like are important to me. So, affordable housing projects, right? You can set that up as a Google Alert. You can set up a Google Alert for what the mayor's doing, or I set up my own IFPTE Local 21 just to see what what catches in the news. So that's also another way that you can find out information more closely in a way that you're not always wading through what's going on the news cycle.
So those are all great tips. If someone wants to help a campaign, what do you think is like a good way to help? What should they do? Some of the ways that they could volunteer or.
Yeah, volunteering on a campaign is something I encourage everybody to do, not just because I do this for a living, but it's because you really get to see the behind the scenes of what it takes to win a campaign. And you get to see that there really is a role for everyone. So in a typical campaign, you got a campaign manager, you got a treasurer, you got a volunteer manager, you have a field director, the candidate is running. But there's also all these other things that people can do. You can make food for volunteers. You can write postcards. You can, if you really like exercising, precinct walking, knocking on doors is a great way to get the vote out. You can post on social media. You can talk to your friends and neighbors. You can, if you are an amazing host or a hostess or a host, you can throw a party. There's just like a lot of different ways that people can actually be contributing in a campaign outside of what you think is just like traditional field canvassing. But that being said, field canvassing is extremely important. So I highly recommend people to also try doing that as a shift to check it out. Sometimes people need just financial support. Sometimes people need just to talk about like what they're doing, right? My husband, for example, he actually is really good friends with one of the people that's running for state assembly, and he's been able to knock on doors and tell his personal story. Like, I'm his friend from high school. Like, I grew up in the street. Like, I was able to do this, and guess what? That makes a huge difference, even though he's not typically politically a political insider or working in the specific field. But it goes so much more than what you would think. So those are just a couple of things. If you're really interested, feel free to follow up with me. I'll let you know all the ways you can get involved.
All right. It looks like there's a question from the chat. So about encouraging people to vote, Prop 33 on rent control seems like an important issue because of rising rent costs. But some housing organizations do not support the measure due to the main backers' views about the fundamentals of the housing crisis. So I guess how do you navigate the nuance of voting and doing the best you can if you might not have access to all the information? I mean, a little bit like maybe you could even like take off the SVET Home Action Fund hat for a second and put on the IFPTE Local hat for a second too, if you want. But just to give you the space to do that, but to make sure you're doing that explicitly if you need to.
Yeah, Thanks for the question. And thanks, Josh, for being able to take my hats on and off. I think that whenever people say like they feel like they don't have enough information to vote, I think that comes from like wanting to be able to make like informed choices and wanting to be able to stand by their decision. But when we don't vote and when we're apathetic about voting, that is also a position that we're taking. It's just to address that and knowing that like, you know, as a young person, they're always like, the youth vote will be able to surpass blah, blah, blah. We're going to be able to do this in this millennial generation or Gen Z generation because of the amount of people that exist. But because so many people are so apathetic and turned off from politics, like we're not actually able to harness that, collective power and strength in numbers. And so that is just the reality that we live in which there is a lot that we can be doing as a voting bloc as young people, like people my age, but we're not there yet because of this thinking that we don't have enough information or not feeling like trust, right, towards participating in our civic duty. But I do think that sometimes it really is about in terms of like how we can encourage people to still do that. If there really is something that people feel really uncomfortable about not voting in, like I know a lot of people, even experts, they're like, how do I vote on this judge? Like that's a common question that people think about. I think we really do still need to encourage like on the ballot, we should try to fill them out as much as we can. Sometimes the best that we can do is try to get as much information and still make a decision. It does come down to what you think, like, hey, like these are people who are supporting it that I feel really weird about, but is this really going to be able to move the policy? Is this really going to be able to make a difference in my community? Like, is this something that makes it, is going to change the needle? And I think sometimes we just do have to see and talk a little bit more about it with our friends on like why they feel that way and maybe trying to get to a resolution. The judge thing that I said, for example, like I that is something that I myself am like, I do need to look up a little bit more than just like a typical local candidate race or a measure. And even if I'm like, I don't really know if this is the right person for me to support, like I still end up voting just because I think that it does make a difference and it matters. And at the same time, I do want to remind people that you can also still reach out to some of these campaigns and really like have robust conversations. Like from now until November, people want to engage with voters. People want to hear your opinions. People want to hear like why you have hesitations about things. And so I really encourage taking the time right now in order to do that work and talking it out in really talking to these campaigns so that they take your those nuances seriously, right? Like if we're not going to be able to communicate to certain candidates or measures or whatever, like concerns, how are they able to take that into account and get that feedback and be better? So long-winded answer of saying just keep engaging and still try to get people to vote.
Yeah, so I think all of that is really important. I want to, thank you again, Kathy. That was great presentation. Really appreciate you being here. So we're going to, or maybe give a virtual round of applause to Kathy. And thank you again. And we're going to move on to the wrapping up this. Next, can we put up this call to action slide? Thank you. So, with all of our policy and action programs, we like to end with some actions that everybody can take. So the first thing is to sign up to volunteer for Prop 5. We're sharing the link in the chat. The bit.ly is up on the screen as well. Prop 5 can only pass, as we were saying before, it's super, super close. It's super, super important. So it can only pass if we get the word out, and that takes work. So if everybody could commit to volunteering at least twice to sign up, bring in your friends and family too, if that's possible. But this is going to take a lot of effort, and it's super important. So the second call to action for today's policy in action is wherever you live. So this is something that Kathy talked about. Contact whoever is running for office to represent you. Tell them that affordable housing production, preservation, and renter protections are important to you. Ask them for their affordable housing plans. And this is a way that that candidates will come to understand that affordable housing is crucial in our region. So we ask that you make sure that all the candidates asking you for your vote get this message, understand this. And so that way, whoever wins, they'll know that their constituents care about housing affordability. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Silicon Valley at Home Policy Manager, Allison Singalani, for an important request.
Thank you, Josh. And Kathy, thank you so much for such a great such a great presentation, and for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. Really appreciate it. So at SB at Home, we believe everyone deserves a safe, stable home. If you do too, we invite you to join us as a member. When you join SB at Home, together we can build and sustain a movement for affordable housing. We're stronger together than we ever can be in isolation. Because you're so important to us, we want to make sure that membership is open and accessible to everyone. So there's not a minimum cost to join. Feel free to pay whatever you can. Your membership helps support our work, including programs like the Policy in Action today. You can find the link to join us in the chat, and together we can work together towards solving the Bay Area's affordable housing crisis. Thank you so much, and back to you, Josh.
Yeah, so okay, before we let you go, we have a quick 3-question poll to get your feedback on the event today. And we appreciate everybody taking a minute to complete that and let us know how we're doing. So please do your polls. I see the polls going. And just, thank you everybody for being a part of this policy in action. The next policy in action is a Voices of Affordable Housing. This is going to be the last policy in action before the election. So this is like a last sort of gear up, tune up, something to get people excited about how important affordable housing is. And so we can all be energized going into the final stretch towards the election. So the Eventbrite is in the chat. And we'd love for you to stay connected with us. So sign up for our newsletter by scanning the QR code on the slide. We promise you won't regret it. And so thanks once again. Have a wonderful weekend, and take care, everybody. Bye.